Some of you may or may not know that I started my professional career as a teacher, and while I'm no longer working in the classroom, it has had a lasting impact on me and every career change I've made since then. But what does this have to do with D&D? Stick with me and find out. Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we explore our love of geeky wisdom. My name's Brian, and I appreciate you joining me as we explore education and Dungeons and Dragons. For today, since this topic hits home for me, I'm going to share some personal background information to give you a better idea of how all of this will relate back to D&D. Then I'm going to give you an overview of some teacher requirements and responsibilities. Even though we've all been students, many of you may not have worked as a teacher, but if you have, please comment below. And I want to set a baseline understanding of some of the general characteristics of teachers that may go unnoticed. Finally, I'm going to show you how D&D fit into all of this, from my perspective at least. Okay, let's get rolling. Well, ever since I was young, pretty young, I've had three very unique and, at the time, very different from the mainstream interests. I was a martial artist, I was a comic book nerd, and I played D&D. Unlike today, the path to having a job in the world of comics or D&D was not really evident at the time. No one really thought, here's the path that you do to make it as a comic book artist or writer or producer of Dungeons and Dragons books. I just wasn't old enough to realize that it could happen, or there wasn't really a way kind of carved out for me at the time. I tended to stick unconsciously to the one that I thought would be the best fit for me, and the one that arguably held the highest level of interest throughout my whole life, and that's being a martial arts instructor. It was something that was attainable. I had an instructor. I knew what he did to get there. I was already teaching classes as I got old enough and I earned my black belt and was able to step in. This was something that was very attainable. So I did know that I wanted to go to college, and when I went to college, I wanted to pick something that would fit, that would make it advantageous for me. I would learn from this, and I would be able to jump right into being the best martial arts instructor that I could. You're thinking of it right now. Let's go ahead and say it. Everybody on three. 1, 2, 3. Accounting. If you can't hear it off camera, there's a storm, and it literally just thundered when I said accounting. So it's still going. This was a bad choice for a hard-kicking, superhero-loving dungeon master. But one day, something happened. A very rare moment for a young man. I actually listened to the advice from a parent. My dad and I were talking, and he suggested that maybe you should look into being a teacher. See if that fits into your interests and your goals better than accounting. And you know what? It did. I'd already discovered that I had a knack for teaching when I taught a large number of classes for my instructor. I had actually been running classes on my own at school as a college student. It just kind of took off on its own, and people knew that I had something I could teach, and I had a small group of people that I taught almost every week. College students, they drop in and out, but it was something that I was pretty proud of. I ran the club at the college. I was doing pretty well. So I knew that I could do things if I knew the subject and I was put in that position of authority. I didn't know if I could do it when it was just me jumping out on my own, but as long as I was prepared and I had good knowledge of what I was talking about, I could make it work. So I wouldn't give up on my dream of being a martial arts instructor. I was really kind of getting additional training through this educational path that I was taking in college. And it was great. I learned about educational theories and methodology and evidence-based techniques that could be applied to teaching anything, really. And that's what I did. I switched majors, I graduated with a degree in elementary education, and from there I went to teach elementary school for about 5 years. And while I never did become a full-time martial arts instructor, I've continued to teach martial arts in one way, shape, or form ever since then. All right, so let's dive in and learn about what are some of the basic qualifications of an elementary school teacher. And I promise you, this will all pull back to D&D. Knowledge of the subjects is sort of at the forefront here, right? Like you have to be comfortable with what you know about what you're teaching. And this goes through grades 1 through 6 because when you get certified as an elementary school teacher, you're not certified to just teach third grade, for example. You need to be flexible enough to move from grade level to grade level. A lot of times people stick with a grade level because that's how the school district kind of works, and they can kind of let them do what they'd like to do, and you can work in that line as a career, but you may be moved all around depending on the district. You also need to know the developmental ability of the people that you're teaching, the children, the little people ages 5 through 12, depending on what grade level you're going through, and how to communicate effectively with them. And in order to do that, you need patience. You are going to see children of all different types of ability levels and backgrounds and experience, and that's what's great about being a teacher, right? Is you get to help everyone from all different backgrounds. But it also means that you have to communicate in ways that they'll understand, which is something that you learn and something that you develop. It's a skill, but it's also an art in a lot of ways that you will develop as you have experience. Speaking of communication, you need to be able to communicate with their parents and also administrators, because you need to work with the administration at your school, whether it's with just your principal or even vice principal. You're going to get observed. People will come in while you're teaching with a checklist on a little clipboard, and they may go, although it's probably an iPad now, but at any rate, you'll get an observation form done, and then you'll get feedback on how you're doing as an educator. You also have to have the confidence to speak in front of groups, not just your own class, but any group at the school. It might be the lunchroom, it might be taking kids to PE, it could be anything. But also, not just with children, you need to be comfortable speaking in front of your peers, because you're going to be getting together with in-service training and lesson planning and all kinds of things. Finally, you have to be creative and produce lesson plans that will inspire the kids to learn. That is easier said than done when you have material that they may not be interested in, but some way you'll have to make it work. So those are some basic qualifications. Well, what about the things that you actually have to do? What are the responsibilities as an elementary school teacher? Well, first thing, you have to manage the classroom. If the classroom isn't managed well, then you aren't getting much stuff done in that classroom. No one's learning anything with a classroom that's out of control. You also have to communicate and teach one or more of the subject clearly and effectively. This makes sense with your ability to do that. You have to follow school procedures. You can't just do it your way all the time. You have to follow whatever procedures were set out for the school, not only for running your individual classroom, but the timing for taking kids to different places. When is lunch? What is the process to getting them to the cafeteria? What are all the different things that you need to know about the school rules, how to communicate with parents? What are the procedures in place? And then you have to monitor the students' progress, right? So you have to see how are they doing, but also there are going to be some kids that need some extra help, and you're going to be able to do that too. I mentioned the procedures and the rules were there from the top down, so there are school rules, and you need to encourage good behavior in and out of the classroom. This is getting tricky if you're someone that has to manage a large group of kids. And then like I mentioned before, as far as the progress goes, because it's not just grading, progress can be done in a lot of different ways, but you do have to grade assignments and homework and tests and all kinds of things. And then helping students prepare for standardized testing. This was a big part of when I was teaching that I didn't really think about when I was going through school to become a teacher. But yeah, there are standardized tests in pretty much every state now, and you have to make sure that your kids can do well on them. You also have to, not to mention, recess, but you have to make sure that they get to lunch and that they go to art or PE or computer class, and how to make sure that they get there in a timely way where no one is kicking each other or pushing or pulling, and it's a challenge. Then you also need to talk to the parents about how their kids are doing. I mean, that's important. And finally, you have to meet and work with other teachers and supervisors to discuss policies and curricula to make sure that you're on the same page as what's supposed to be happening at your school. This is a lot of stuff. Okay, so let's look at the teacher qualifications again. One of the things that pops out to me is knowledge of the subjects. I've been playing D&D for a long time, and I didn't realize until later, probably even after my first couple years of teaching, how much it had an impact on me remembering things and going back to refer to information, being able to think on the fly about different subjects and topics, to be able to answer questions, but also to say, let me go back and look at this information. So it wasn't just me understanding the subject. I mean, it was elementary ed. I wasn't teaching calculus at this point, so I had a basic knowledge of most of the subjects anyway, but you would be surprised how much detail elementary school kids go into, and it may be much different than you think, unless you have kids and you are sort of seeing that come to light because you're going through it. But what we're asking elementary school kids to do is much harder, I think, than what I used to do when I was in elementary school, or at least it's perceived that way. And D&D really helped me understand that grasp of knowledge, and that was huge for me. And then this also really helped me communicate. When you're young, and I was not even a teenager when I started playing, and then I was a young teenager, ages 13, 14, when I started running my own groups. So when I'm the dungeon master for a session, I have to be able to tell a story. I have to be able to communicate effectively with everybody at the table. I wasn't really good at communicating yet when I was that age. I was just learning how to do that. But it gave me the practice that I would not have had before. And in addition to that, I had to communicate as a variety of people. When I was running a game, I had to play everybody in the world that were not the player characters at the table. And so it was pretty rudimentary and basic for me when I was a teenager, but that skill of being able to put on the mask or the thought process of another person, even though they're imaginary, it also let me work with people of a bunch of different backgrounds. Because let's face it, when you have new players at the table and you're running a game, you might have someone that's been playing just as long as you, but you may have also introduced a brand new person to the table. In my live stream campaign, which is going great, I have that. I have a variety of backgrounds and a variety of different age levels, and a variety of different experience levels. So this is something that I didn't realize how much experience I had already gained when I was young, and then continued throughout the years I was playing. I'm going to just highlight these again: communication, and communication. I was comfortable. I learned to be comfortable speaking in front of people. Now, this just didn't go me playing D&D as a teenager and then jump light years ahead to me being a teacher. No, me playing D&D as a teenager helped me when I had to give a speech in class. It helped me when I had to talk to another room full of adults at dinner. It helped me when I had to speak in an interview early on going to work at a grocery store. So the communication skills that I was picking up through playing Dungeons and Dragons helped me immensely. Now, I also, and this is not something that you normally think about, when do you enforce the rules of anything when you are a kid? When do you really enforce rules? Well, if you play sports and you're filling in as an umpire or a referee, then you might be enforcing some rules there. But usually it's when, and even that, by the way, sports are games. Playing games are probably the first ways when you're young that you learn to enforce the rules. You're playing tag. No, he didn't hit me. He didn't get me. He thought he did. He just got my shirt. He didn't get me. Well, is that tag? Someone has to decide that. You learn that stuff as a kid. With Dungeons and Dragons, there are a lot of rules, and I started out in Advanced D&D, and then 2nd edition, and then 3rd edition, and understanding the complex rules, and then, because the D&D book said so, saying, if you are the dungeon master, you make the final call, you make the ruling. That ability to interpret rules it was something that I didn't realize how important that was. Think about how much of an impact that has on a younger person trying to develop. And then this goes without saying, but if you're creating your own dungeons and creating your own campaigns, then you have creativity. As a matter of fact, I once showed up to school as Gandalf. I mean, full white beard, grayish beard, not this one, but a fake one because I didn't have one of these at the time. Wig, gray robes, the staff, the whole bit. And I taught for an entire day as Gandalf because we were studying in the reading class, we were studying The Hobbit. And so we did the whole book, we read it, and when it came time for the end of that book and we were doing sort of a deep dive into it, and we were doing the exam on what everybody learned and all of those things, that was the day I came in as Gandalf. And, it really sunk in. I looked like an idiot, but for the kids, it was fun. And they talked to me that day as if I was Gandalf. They role-played. They spoke to me and said, Mr. Gandalf. It was a blast. So let's think about what are the responsibilities and duties of a teacher and how that relates back in. So some of these, again, are going to kind of be really evident, but you are managing a classroom similar to managing a table. Now, it's much, much harder to manage a classroom. You're leveling up as players, and you may just be learning the game, a game that's as complex and intellectual and imaginative as Dungeons and Dragons. There is a learning curve. And so you have to kind of, as a DM, or hopefully you learn as a DM to monitor how your players are doing and help them along and guide them and provide the extra mentorship for the people that need it. You're enforcing those rules again, and you're hopefully doing it in a way that is conducive to good and fun play at the table, although I have to admit there are times where there was rules lawyer arguments at the table, and those of you that have played for a while know what I mean. But as the final adjudicator of the rules, you have to think things through and make sure that you're giving appropriate rulings for situations. Again, this is very similar. It's not at this. I have to stop and say this is not saying that it's the same. I'm saying that my experience gained was building the real life important rules to enforce. I was ready. I was ready to dive in. Also, talking to parents, man, like when you are a kid and you have to play at other people's houses, you will be talking to parents all the time, literally as a kid. But this time, you're talking to them as someone that is kind of in charge of their kids while they're playing. Not in charge like, you're not telling your players when their bedtime is, but what you are doing is you have a little bit of authority at the table, and it's an interesting thing. Like, I remember talking to my friends' parents more because we were playing for long periods of time at their house, and they were graciously enough allowing us to play at their house and giving us food and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, the ability to talk about what was going on and how things were handled was pretty important. And then also meeting with other teachers and supervisors to discuss policies. Now, you are obviously not meeting with other supervisors as a D&D player, but what you are doing is you are talking with each other all the time about how things are going and whether there are house rules at your table that need to be adjusted, whether there's upcoming campaigns that you want to change. And so your fellow players are kind of stepping into that role. So yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so that's a little bit of geek philosophy about teaching Dungeons and Dragons, and this is probably going to be the first in a series of Dungeons and Dragons videos, so be sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you get an update. But I do want to say that this was not me saying in any way, shape, or form that being a teacher is the same as being a dungeon master or playing D&D. It's not. What I am saying is I don't think I would have been as good of a teacher, and I think I was a decent teacher. I don't think I would have been as good if I had not started playing Dungeons and Dragons earlier. Yeah. Alright, so let's wrap up with a bit of geek philosophy from a pretty famous teacher. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard from. You look in excellent health to me, Potter, so you'll excuse me if I don't let you off homework today. I assure you that if you die, you need not hand it in.